The images shocked the world. American diplomats marched through the streets of Tehran. The United States Embassy seized. For 444 days, the world watched a crisis unfold. Television screens filled with images of blindfolded hostages, angry crowds, and a nation in turmoil. But the revolution didn't begin in 1979. It began years earlier, and then we found the detail that never made it into the official record. Because just a few years before the hostage crisis, Iran wasn't America's enemy. It was one of America's closest allies in the Middle East, a strategic partner, a regional power, a pillar of American influence in one of the most important parts of the world. How did a trusted ally become the country holding American hostages? To answer that question, we need to go back decades before the U.S. Embassy attack. Back to a decision few Americans knew about at the time. The decision made in the shadows of the Cold War, Operation Ajax, a decision that would alter the future of an entire nation and reshape the relationship between Iran and the United States for generations. This 1980 found footage archive tape attempts to explain why Iran mattered to America. But to understand the crisis that shocked the world, we first need to understand why Iran became so important in the first place. In the early 1950s, Iran's Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, challenged foreign control of the country's oil industry. When he nationalized Iran's oil, he put himself on a collision course with Britain and the United States. In 1953, a covert operation known as Operation Ajax helped remove Mossadegh from power and restored Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. To Washington, the outcome was a strategic victory. Iran remained a key ally, oil continued to flow, and a vital buffer against Soviet influence had been preserved. But as Iran's oil wealth expanded, so did the power of the Shah's government. Massive modernization projects transformed the country, yet many Iranians saw the benefits flowing to the state, foreign interests, and a privileged elite while political opposition was increasingly suppressed. Beneath the image of progress, resentment was growing, and over the next 2 decades, those tensions would help ignite a revolution.
It was the oil income that triggered the revolution. It smashed traditional family and social arrangements by pulling people off the land and into the cities. In the cities, squalor combined with anger and inflation, a recipe for revolution. Mr. Again, Carter was continuing a policy conducted by 5 American presidents before him. In 1972, President Nixon supplied the weapons to make Iran the policeman of the Persian Gulf. This was the Nixon Doctrine, which relied on one strong nation to safeguard a region. The doctrine's critics say it squandered billions and contributed to the Shah's fantasy that Iran was the world's next great power. Former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger thinks there was no choice.
The Soviet Union had just made a massive arms deal with Iraq and was pouring large quantities of the most modern equipment into Iraq. It already had an arms arrangement with Syria. In some way, these forces had to be counterbalanced. The judgment of the administration in 1972 was that Iran could counterbalance the radical forces. And for a period of 7 years, it did.
Control of Iran meant influence over oil, trade routes, and one of the world's most critical maritime choke points, the Strait of Hormuz. From the viewpoint of American policymakers, Iran wasn't just an ally. It was a barrier against Soviet influence in the region.
Crown Prince Abdullah greets the Shah as he lands at Baghdad airport after a 7-hour flight from Rome. Here he was to remain overnight as the guest of King Faisal before completing the journey to Tehran. Meanwhile, in Tehran itself, all stood ready to welcome the return of the Shah after the dramatic development in events which first compelled him to flee and then led to a royalist coup d'etat in which Mossadegh was arrested.
If they had realized that it was an American-supported movement, we could have been in quite a lot of trouble.
Kermit Roosevelt, Theodore Roosevelt's grandson, was the CIA man who plotted the overthrow of Iran's prime minister, Mohammad Mossadegh, in 1953. Mossadegh had offended the Western powers by nationalizing the oil fields, then owned by the British.
Very competent agents had started a movement. They led a very large and constantly growing mob up the avenue on which the American embassy was at one end, and Mossadegh's house was towards the middle of town. And they went right by the American embassy and the CIA building, which was next door. It gave us considerable encouragement when they saw it. There was a terrific turnout for the Shah when he came back to Tehran. It was quite a strong popular demonstration.
Mr. Roosevelt, when this plan for a coup took shape, it was concealed from the outgoing President of the United States, Harry Truman. Did he not know about the CIA's involvement?
It was Allen Dulles' decision, and he simply felt that there was no need to discuss it with anyone other than the incoming Secretary of State and the incoming President. Every administration, every new administration wants its own thing. And Foster Dulles was enabled to regard this as his own thing. And he did, and he enjoyed it very much.
You had $1 million in cash to run the coup, right?
Now, that's right. And we used about $60,000 of it. That was all.
Are you saying that $60,000 was all it took?
Yeah. I don't know where the money went, and I didn't ask because it was so damn little that no one was going to ask me any questions. All they asked me was, how the dickens did you get away with spending so little?
In the long run, the price turned out to be high. Many Iranians believed that the Shah had returned with Western strings attached, that this was the beginning of what some called 25 years of American occupation.
Before the revolution, Iran wasn't isolated from the West. It was connected to it. Tens of thousands of Americans lived and worked in Iran. Engineers, teachers, military advisors, oil workers. Many expected to spend years there. Some married Iranians, some raised families there. Few imagined how quickly everything would change.
What was not understood was the political changes that would be inevitably associated with such a dramatic transformation of a backward society which was moving into the modern era in a 10-year period with a process that had taken nearly a century in Western Europe. That is a criticism that is, and that one should reflect about, the lack of understanding of the impact of economic change on political change.
By 1978, almost 40,000 Americans had moved in, most of them military and civilian technical advisors and their families. The life was easy, the pay was good. They might almost have been living in an affluent American suburb. It was a Christian and Western oasis in an Islamic country.
Most of the Americans, almost all of them, they were living in the best apartments, the best places in the city. And they always had the ability to live highly comfortably. And the poor people, most of the people didn't like that. I saw like an American in a store, I would say, listen, you're taking my food, you're taking my right.
It is a distressing irony that as Iran grew wealthier, both wound up in the hands of 10% of the people. Richest of all was the Shah himself. His beginnings were fairly modest. His father, who created the Pahlavi monarchy in 1921, was an army colonel. But he called himself King of Kings, and the Pahlavi dynasty was arrogant, repressive, and corrupt, weaknesses largely discounted by American intelligence. This report by a House subcommittee criticized the CIA and State Department for insensitivity to deep-rooted problems in Iran. The subcommittee said that intelligence and analysis were weak, and that unfavorable assessments of the Shah tended to be downplayed. The CIA's political analyst for Iran from 1968 to 73, Jesse Leaf, says that happened to his assessments.
The agency has a lot of people publishing for a very small audience, and my reporting would go to the President, Secretary of State, and policymakers. I remember distinctly writing in the early 70s about the Shah's megalomania and delusions of grandeur, his feelings he was a world power, and the danger that this presented to United States policy, and was told in no uncertain terms such reporting was not going to be published. It was not U.S. policy to criticize the Shah as I was doing. This was against the normal established policy toward Iran and the Shah.
The question is asked whether the CIA failed. And to some extent, the answer has to be yes. But in fairness, one has to point out that a revolution couldn't have gotten started if the person most concerned, namely the Shah, had not, if his intelligence services hadn't failed as well.
The Shah's intelligence was gathered by his secret police, SAVAK, which the CIA set up and the CIA and Israel helped to train. During the revolution, demonstrators destroyed SAVAK headquarters. SAVAK spied on and tormented those who opposed the Shah. One of its tools was torture.
These are descriptions of some of our brightest and most promising young men of this country who for the first time dared to stand against the dictatorship. Many of them died directly under torture. Some of them were made to commit suicide.
Hedayat Matin Daftari, a leader of the liberal opposition, is on Khomeini's wanted list. During the Shah's regime, he helped parents of young people who had vanished.
Information has not been found about some of them. Some of their graves are not known. And what is important to a family is to find a grave, to make sure that he's dead. This is just one small drop against an ocean of sufferance, an ocean of atrocities, an ocean of crimes committed by the old regime of Iran, which was highly supported, highly guided, and highly accepted by the United States.
From the outside, the strategy appeared to be working.
Iran, 1979.
The average Iranian linked the United States with the oppressive governing elite of Iran, and which is why there's so much hostility there now toward Americans.
NBC News correspondent Richard Hunt talked to some of the mourners.
How was he killed?
He killed by the officers, Murder, yes. The United States government give the Shah plane, bomb, Carter. He is the right hand of the Shah. He helped him. Of course. Yeah, yes, murder. That boy. Another one.
In exile in France, from which he ran the revolution, the Ayatollah Khomeini exploited the feeling against the United States, which he has called a wounded snake. While Khomeini was in France, Ambassador to Iran William Sullivan recommended making contact with him. The decision was no.
The State Department agreed to send a man to be in touch with him. I had proposed that we be in touch with him. That proposal was vetoed, and so no direct contact has ever been had, as far as I know, between the United States government officially and the Ayatollah directly. We did talk to a number of his acolytes and a number of his assistants, but there has been no direct contact with the Ayatollah.
Whose veto was it?
It came in the name of the president.
If contact had been established with the Ayatollah, would that have annoyed the Shah?
No. The Shah had been aware that we were going to make the contact and had approved it.
But the deeper the divide became, the harder it was to ignore. A generation of grievances had been building beneath the surface, and by 1979, Iran was no longer a country at peace with itself. Revolution was no longer unthinkable. It was approaching.
It was a boom town. Now, most of the million construction workers are unemployed. The Air Force is crippled by a shortage of spare parts and technicians. All the armed services are deteriorating, with senior officers executed, retired, or in exile. Many of the jobless in Tehran have become street vendors. Of the workforce, perhaps a third, 3 million, are unemployed. Khomeini may be sitting on a volcano. These disillusioned students are waiting for visas to leave the country. Newspapers are censored when they're not closed down. Opposition parties prohibited. Alcohol and music are poisons to be eliminated. Punishment by the lash is common. Khomeini's enemies call him the Shah with a turban. Despite Khomeini's shortcomings, signs of hatred of the Shah can still be seen. There have been hundreds of executions so far. Most of the victims were associated with the Shah. Under Khomeini, there has been rioting again in Tehran, with Khomeini as the target. The issue on this day was press censorship, and angry leftists were in the streets. The next day, the Khomeiniites were in the streets in reply. Again, Ambassador Sullivan.
These people are going to have to figure out what they're going to do for the future. They're far from having determined that yet. Unfortunately, there are so many weapons in the hands of so many diverse groups that I feel that there will be internal turmoil in Iran for some time to come.
Turmoil there is among such minorities as these Arabs of Khuzestan in the south. They virtually destroyed the Shah by shutting down the oil fields and threatened to close them again. The minorities want self-rule. The Kurds in the north are fighting to get it.
I think it's a very difficult thing. I think that perhaps it is the most important problem the revolution faces. If the government doesn't give them some kind of self-determination, what will happen in future is separatism.
Separatism is a mild way of putting it. Civil war is a possibility. Oil production could be ended. The country could be torn apart. Even without that, there is no cheerful prospect for the United States.
The oil is a political weapon as much as a commercial one. We don't hide that one. This is not something, it is idealistic, and to say, no, it is not.
Every government involved believed it was acting rationally. Every side believed it was protecting its future. Every decision seemed justified at the time. Yet the result was a crisis that reshaped the Middle East. Looking back, what do you think was the single decision that changed everything? The coup? The support for the Shah? The revolution itself? Or was the outcome already set in motion long before anyone realized it? Fast forward to today. The Cold War is over. The Shah is gone. The hostages were released decades ago. Yet the story didn't end in 1979. Nearly half a century later, the United States and Iran still find themselves locked in a cycle of confrontation, crisis, and uneasy diplomacy. The Strait of Hormuz remains one of the most strategically important waterways on Earth. American warships still patrol the region. Presidents still address the nation about Iran. And the consequences of decisions made generations ago continue to shape events today. Different leaders, different generations, the same region, many of the same questions. Because history doesn't always end when the headlines fade. Sometimes it echoes for decades.
Terrible. The deal would have left Iran with the ability to enrich uranium for an atom bomb while removing the sanctions. The right deal that is needed is to dismantle Iran's capacity to make atomic bombs, and only then dismantle the sanctions.
This is not a so-called regime change war, but the regime sure did change, and the world is better off for it. Today, in their desperation, the enemy is unmasked.
History rarely turns on a single moment. It's a chain of decisions, each one setting the stage for the next. The 1953 CIA-backed coup, the Shah, the revolution, the hostage crisis, and now, decades later, the tensions remain. So when you look at the relationship between the United States and Iran today, which moment do you believe changed everything?